So getting a legendary piece of gear in Guild Wars 2 is tough. Well, not usually tough as it is difficult, but more of a time-consuming and, well, gold-consuming activity. But why go for legendaries? I mean, they have the same stat values of Ascended gear, right? Well, that is true, but they will literally be the only piece of gear you will ever need again in that particular slot for all of your characters. Maximum convenience. After making some legendaries of my own, I've come to the realization with what makes things a bit more simplified, and that's what I'd like to share with you here today. Here are some tips and tricks to make your legendary grind far easier. Okay, so getting into a legendary crafting mode mentality, we'll call it, you have to understand that making a legendary will not happen overnight. I mean, unless you get like the Wizard's Vault legendary weapon and you have all those, but anyway, these legendary items will take time. That is okay, however. Having the mindset that you will take what you can get at your own pace is my best tip for you. This may look different from player to player, or some may attempt to rush it down as quickly as possible and call it a day. Others may be like me and just pick at it over the course of a few months. Guild Wars 2 is great about not punishing you for taking it slow, so be kind to yourself and take your time. My next tip that I have for you is your selection of legendaries. Which one are you going to go for? Now, there is a great amount of legendary items that you can get in this game, but how do you pick the right one for you? Well, my thoughts have always been focused on the ones that have the most benefits across all of my characters. So in that case, I would focus on getting gear that is used by most, if not all, of my characters. I recommend you doing the same. For example, many classes can use a sword. So the legendary bolt would be a fantastic place to start if you wanted to get a legendary weapon, versus not as many classes that can use the legendary longbow kudzu, which can only be used by a handful of classes. For one of my first longer legendary collections, I actually focused on completing the legendary accessory Vision, which each and every character that I have can make use of. Of course, I will stress that this isn't the end-all be-all. If you really want a legendary because you either love a weapon on your class or you want to focus on a particular gear type, that's okay. Pick what you want. I should also note here that the legendary armor pieces are only available to that particular tier, meaning if you unlock a legendary light piece of chest armor, only characters that can use light armor can use that particular chest piece. So sorry to your guardian. My next tip is actually going to be in regards to expenses. Making a legendary is typically no small financial feat. Now, don't be discouraged at this, as there are plenty of ways to make gold in this game and to build up your reserve, but depending on your piece, it could be a pretty penny in the long run. I recommend finding some ways to make some gold in the game, such as passive gold each day, or perhaps even a little bit more of active farming. I've included a video link in the description of ways that you can make some passive gold over time, and in a minimal amount of daily effort. Now, this technically can be circumvented, as usually it is the tier 4 and tier 6 materials that tend to be a bit pricier because you need a large quantity of them. And there are a handful of guides out there talking about how you can implement daily farms for these particular tiered crafting materials. But another way to get these particular materials is actually going to the laurel vendor. Laurels are mainly now purchased through the Wizard's Vault, and while usually not the most important thing in there, they can be exchanged for bags of materials from any laurel vendor. This probably won't get you enough to avoid the cost altogether, but it can definitely make the financial cost a bit, well, less rough. Regardless, prepare to farm up. Now, here's a really quick tip, and this is something that I just want to put out there. When crafting a legendary piece of armor, never change the stats of the ascended piece of gear that is the precursor. Legendary armors have their precursor ascended pieces that are used in the final Mystic Forge. However, once you have selected the stat value of that particular piece of gear, do not change it. Don't touch it. If you change it in the Mystic Forge to go, say, for example, from Berserkers to Vipers, that piece of gear no longer is a precursor, which means you will have to repeat the process to get the ascended piece of gear, the ascended precursor, over again. I thankfully was told about this before I made this mistake. and I'm hoping that I can help you save yourself a massive headache. Once you get the Ascended Precursor, don't touch it, just leave it as is. So here is another great tip for anyone who is looking to craft a legendary. Research the crafting skills you will need beforehand. I recently made Vision, the legendary accessory, as I had mentioned, and I thought I was going to be good to go. However, I suddenly needed to have a high-level artificer, which meant that I needed to slog my crafting from 0 to like 400 to be able to craft a gift of energy. This, well, was a bit of a pain, but I did have the gold, obviously, to handle this. Other new players may not be happy to hear that they now have to level crafting all the way up to near max to create the next step of their legendary piece of gear. Now, leveling the crafting typically isn't super duper expensive to get up to 400 or higher. However, it could just be a bit disheartening that it's another added expense to it. Okay, so now here are some of the best tricks that I know as far as creating legendary gear in Guild Wars 2. First one, double progression. Many legendary items require you to complete some form of endgame content, whether that be raids, player versus player, world v world, to name a few. But there are multiple ways to progress a legendary item while working on other legendary items. Let me explain. I was recently working on the legendary PvP chest for my Elementalist. At the same time, I was progressing on the PvP legendary backpack, the Ascension, as well as the legendary accessory Vision. Vision requires you to get certain armor pieces to fill out the first part of the collections. But these particular armor pieces are also at the end of PvP and World v World reward tracks. Point being is that while I was moving the needle on a handful of different targeted legendaries all at the same time, with a primary focus of my legendary PvP chest. I'm currently doing the same thing with a legendary weapon. I need a Gift of Battle from World vs. World. In that same time, I am gaining levels as well as materials with the intent of crafting Conflux, the legendary ring tied to World vs. World. And mainly, I really just need to do the skirmish tickets because I will also need like 4 Gifts of Battle to eventually make Conflux. But the idea is that I'm working on things together as this ends up saving me time in the long run. Plan out your legendaries and see if there are ways that you can make it a bit simplified by progressing on multiple tracks at the same time. I also do want to take this time to make a point that if you want to work on a Gen 1 legendary weapon, a first generation legendary weapon, check out the Wizard's Vault for their legendary starter kit. This has a precursor and most of the items that you will need, and you only need like 1,000 Astral Acclaim. It's a truly great value. These tend to be just very simplified and straight to the point. However, there's only so many that are available right now, and there's going to be more, it seems, about like every 3 months, so keep an eye on it. For example, if you wanted to craft the legendary hammer Juggernaut, but the hammer isn't available right now, you might just get the materials to craft Bolt, with the intention of crafting Juggernaut down the road. The next trick that I like to share with you is actually for those financial nuts out there. If you are working on a legendary weapon, either Gen 1 or Gen 3, the easiest way of acquiring this is actually just by purchasing the precursors from the trading post. Now, to some, this may not be an option because they can be upwards of like 100 plus gold, but literally purchasing the precursor will eliminate about 75% of the work leading up to it. Now, you still need the Gift of Battle and the Gift of World Completion or the Gift of Jade Mastery, which is tied to Cantha. But just snagging this item can make all of these things a lot easier, and in this sense, save you a mess of time for really a nominal amount of gold. Again, though, I stress that if you already are worried about the financial cost of legendary items in Guild Wars 2, this may not be the best trick for you. My last trick for you is to understand that legendaries are not actually necessary. Okay, I suppose that this is more of a tip, but Guild Wars 2 is a focused casual game, and at most ends, legendary gear is far more an extra feature than it is mandatory. While it certainly feels great to complete a legendary and have it there and available for all your characters, many players choose not to do legendaries just because they don't wish to grind out that much time. Simply put, getting an ascended piece of gear is far easier to most, and that may end up helping players enjoy the game a little bit better because you can get an ascended piece of gear fairly quickly when compared to a legendary piece of gear. The grind is not necessary, and it's not always warranted, trust me. For the most part, exotic gear will get you just about everything that you need in this game. But if you do want to go down that legendary collection, I just, again, will reiterate, just take your time. There's no rush. If you do have any tips or tricks on how you work on your legendaries, comment down below. I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts. If you'd like to see my first revisit to World v World, where you can get a gift of battle, which is needed for legendary items, click this video here. As always, stay caffeinated, folks.